Imagine you're unconscious, in surgery, and without your consent, a doctor in training practices an intimate exam on you. I-Team reporter Sarah Plate found out this is happening. We need to warn you, some viewers might find this story troubling. Sarah, this is a gray area that's raising not only ethical concerns, but legislative action.
That's right. Pelvic and prostate exams are an important part of our basic care. Our doctors making sure our reproductive organs are healthy. And we know they're also an important part of medical students' training. But this story is about these intimate exams being done without consent, which can shatter patient trust.
I woke up. There was a bright light.
Ashley Weitz remembers being in the emergency room, heavily sedated.
He just kind of said, "I'm almost finished."
Finished? With what? What was her doctor doing?
I don't remember being put into stirrups. I don't remember having my clothing removed.
Her emergency department report says Ashley went to the hospital for nausea, vomiting, and a rapid heartbeat. Nothing she thought would require her doctor to do such an intimate exam. A pelvic exam.
I know that I didn't consent, and I know that we didn't talk about it because I woke up in the middle of the exam screaming.
Ashley was 23 years old at the time and struggled to understand what happened.
I just kind of put it in a corner and went, okay, well, because I have a history of abuse and assault, then that must be why this feels like such a violation.
So even now, after over 10 years, you still are kind of shaken up when you talk about it.
I am.
Ashley is telling us about her experience to shine a light on pelvic exams without patient consent.
I just wanted to be asked.
The KSHB 41I team discovered Ashley isn't alone. Pelvic exams are usually done when the patient is awake and fully aware that their doctor is about to examine the most private areas of their body. But we discovered that medical students have performed pelvic and prostate exams on patients while they're under anesthesia without their explicit consent, and they're often done solely for the student's educational benefit. We learned this has gone on for decades. A 2005 survey revealed that most medical students at the University of Oklahoma had done pelvic exams without consent. And in this 2012 article, a fourth-year medical student said he performed them, quote, for 3 weeks, 4 to 5 times a day. Is this practice still happening on patients who are anesthetized and they don't know and they did not get consent?
Yes. So this kind of thing still happens.
Pediatrician Ari Silver Eisenstadt has spoken out against this for years.
I don't think having students learn pelvic exams is wrong. I think not getting explicit consent and cooperation and having everything be transparent and on the up and up was wrong.
It's a practice he saw as a med student.
The problem was that the woman wasn't being asked for her consent to participate in my medical education.
During his OBGYN rotation, Silver Eisenstadt found ways not to participate in exams on unconscious patients.
I learned when those kinds of things happened, and I wouldn't show up. Never had to do it. That was challenging.
He researched the topic in 2003 and found that students became desensitized about whether consent was important. He also found that patients were willing to participate in students' education if asked.
It would reinforce to medical students that the patient has the ultimate autonomy over their body, and we don't do things to them for our own benefit.
To be clear, Silver Eisenstadt says these types of pelvic exams likely won't happen in every surgery, for example, a knee surgery.
This is, in my experience, exclusively in the context of gynecologic surgery.
But he says patients should always ask who will be in the room during their procedure and speak up if they don't want a medical student practicing pelvic exams on their body.
It's okay if you say no. Because there are plenty of people who are willing to say yes, and it won't have any impact on your care.
At many hospitals, patients sign a form acknowledging that med students can or will be involved in their care, but they may not clearly state a med student could perform certain exams for their training alone. Silver Eisenstadt says many hospitals have policies about getting consent before doing these exams, but he's worried they don't enforce them all the time.
That's part of the trauma, is not knowing.
For sexual abuse survivors like Ashley, who's lived with the feeling that her body wasn't her own, requiring explicit consent is vital. Without it, she says that feeling of uncertainty and violation could continue to cast a shadow on patient care.
Wait a minute, is that something that could have happened to me?
And we reached out to the major medical associations, and they all opposed performing such exams under anesthesia without prior informed consent. But they also oppose, quote, blanket bans on student participation in these cases. And right now, 21 states have banned pelvic exams without consent, but not Missouri and Kansas. And as our investigation continues, we talk to local lawmakers about their efforts to end these types of exams.
I was shocked. I had no idea that this was a common practice.
Sarah, how would anyone know if this ever happened to them?
Well, that's the thing, Dia. Patients likely won't know because in these cases, these exams are not done for the patient's care, so they aren't noted in their charts. Ashley is kind of an outlier. Not many people have an ER report like she does. But we also want to stress tonight that everybody we talk to for this story says you should still absolutely go to the doctor. But remember, you have a say in every part of your care.
Last night at 6, our I-Team told you the story of one woman's experience with an intimate exam she said she didn't consent to.
We also heard from a doctor who's seen this happening in hospitals and spoke out about the practice for years. The story has seen strong responses from you at home.
Yeah, KSHB 41 investigator Sarah Plake brought us that story yesterday, joining us now. So, Sarah, the big question we're hearing from our viewers, what can you do about this?
And like you mentioned yesterday, this is not banned in Kansas or Missouri.
Right, but lawmakers on both sides of the state line have tried to change this, and they, like many people, were shocked to hear that this can happen. Your body essentially being used for teaching purposes, and you didn't consent to it. And these lawmakers say that laws on the books will serve as an added layer of protection for patients. Learning how to do a pelvic and prostate exam is part of medical students' education. These exams are also an extremely important part of your basic care. But we discovered a gray area in medicine where sometimes the lines blur. It's when doctors in training practice these intimate exams on patients under anesthesia without their consent. We learned 21 states have banned this practice, and you can see we've highlighted those in red on this map. But that means it's still legal in 29 states, including Kansas and Missouri.
I was shocked. I had no idea that this was a common practice.
Missouri Senator Lauren Arthur is one of the local lawmakers who want to find a legislative cure. What about this issue made you want to kind of jump into action?
I had a visceral reaction to it.
Arthur introduced a bill last year that would require healthcare providers, including students, to get explicit consent from patients before doing pelvic, prostate, or rectal exams on them while they're unconscious.
These are important procedures. I don't want to create any stigma around them, but under all circumstances, it should only be performed if a patient has given explicit informed consent.
Arthur's bill died in committee. In 2020, Missouri State Representative Shamed Dogan filed a similar bill. It didn't pass, but made it to a hearing with more than a dozen people testifying in support, saying a woman's body or anyone's body shouldn't be used as a mere teaching tool.
I was shocked to learn that this wasn't an anomaly.
Ashley Weitz was one of those who submitted written testimony in support of the bill.
And that my experience was a product of a way of educating that is, not only is it antiquated, not only is it harmful, but it's also just, it's unnecessary.
It's personal to her.
I woke up in the middle of the exam screaming.
A doctor performed a pelvic exam she did not consent to while she was heavily sedated in a Utah emergency room 15 years ago. As a sexual assault survivor, the experience traumatized her so much that she's gone without necessary health care. But she found her voice to help pass bills in other states that would ban what happened to her.
I just wanted to be asked.
MOXA, the Metropolitan Organization to Counter Sexual Assault, also advocated for the Missouri bill. They work with survivors of sexual abuse and trauma like Ashley. Survivors, they say, could face irreparable harm.
Having something done to their body or worrying that something may have been done to their body when they were unconscious or under anesthesia can be tremendously tremendously impactful, can cause anxiety and stress and re-traumatization, flashbacks.
I was concerned about it.
Kansas State Representative Rhys Hsu is also trying to stop this practice. He says patients likely understand that medical students could be involved in their care, especially at teaching hospitals. But this, he says, is different.
A pelvic exam is an extra level of invasion, in my opinion, and then so that should require an extra level of consent that it did not seem like has been happening and is certainly not written into statute.
He filed a bill in 2020, his first act as a freshman lawmaker, but it died too.
The medical society tends to have a little bit more lobbying force in Kansas, and so in the super minority, we don't get much opportunity to get hearings on our bills in the first place, let alone something with opposition.
Hsu and Arthur plan to refile their bills in January.
And I think that with the right forces, with you guys shining a light on this, potentially maybe we can change more hearts and eventually get this passed.
The Kansas Medical Association declined to tell us why it opposed Hsu's bill, but gave us a statement saying, quote, should Representative Hsu introduce a similar bill next legislative session, we will read the language of the bill before taking a position on it, if any. And a tip to take away tonight, pay attention to hospital consent forms. They may not mention anything about doctors in training practicing pelvic exams, and you as a patient have a right to ask about it.
Wow. Well, you did reach out to various entities for last night's piece, and they told you that most of the health systems around here do oppose these kinds of things happening without a patient's consent, right?
That's right, they do, but to the lawmaker's point, this is an added level that they feel would give their constituents an extra layer of security that they have autonomy over their bodies.
Having a heightened form of consent for a more heightened exam.
That's right. That's right.
This is something I knew nothing about till you brought it to our attention yesterday. So great job, Sarah. Thanks for shedding some light on that difficult topic.
Our I-Team's work sounding the alarm on pelvic exams happening without consent by the patient has the ear of local lawmakers.
Thanks to your reporting, I think a number of my colleagues were surprised to learn that patients don't have to consent to these invasive procedures.
It's a sentiment being felt on both sides of the state line. KSHB 41 investigator Sarah Plake has the changes that may be coming to state laws.
This legislative session, lawmakers in Missouri and Kansas are trying again to change a medical practice they and advocates say is harmful to patients. Tell me why this is so important for you to file this bill.
Because I can think of no more egregious invasion of privacy than waking up and realizing that there had been a pelvic exam done on you without your expressed informed consent.
Sarah, this is a gray area.
The KSHB 41 I-Team first told you about this in October.
I know that I didn't consent, and I know that we didn't talk about it because I woke up in the middle of the exam screaming.
That it's legal in Kansas and Missouri for doctors and doctors in training to perform a pelvic exam on an anesthetized patient without the patient knowing about it. This happened to Ashley Weitz, who went to the hospital for nausea, vomiting, and a rapid heartbeat. Nothing she thought would require her doctor to do such an intimate exam.
I just wanted to be asked.
These pelvic exams without consent are usually done as a teaching tool.
Thanks to your reporting, I think a number of my colleagues were surprised to learn that patients don't have to consent to these invasive procedures. And thankfully, we've been able to continue to find bipartisan support to require consent.
Missouri Senator Lauren Arthur and Kansas House Representative Rhys Hsu filed bills in 2021 and 2020 to require that doctors and students get the patient's consent first, but they didn't pass. They're optimistic, however, they'll pass this year.
I'll pre-file the bill and then start my conversations with various stakeholders and see if they're willing to finally have a hearing on it.
Arthur has already pre-filed her bill, Senate Bill 106. Her Republican colleague, Representative Hannah Kelly, also filed a similar bill in the House. Arthur said they're likely going to go with the House version because last year, that's the version that made it the farthest.
A number of advocacy groups have gotten involved and made this their priority. So I suspect lawmakers will hear from those, from their constituents and from those advocacy groups going into session.
Hsu said it was difficult to get the medical lobbyists on board with his bill.
Do you anticipate seeing the same
pushback like you did before?
I don't think so. I think the public conversation, also based on your piece, has changed it a little bit.
If the Kansas Medical Society has an issue with the legislature writing healthcare law, Hsu says he'd support them handling the issue themselves.
If the legislative push helps it happen internally with the Medical Society or Board of Healing Arts, great, but it has to be done legislatively. I think it's important enough that we do.
Arthur says passing this bill will not only protect patients, but also doctors in training.
It would mean that my constituents, our patients, have a better say over what happens to them, that they receive appropriate care, and that our future doctors are well trained and also don't have to feel bad about some of the things that they're asked to do.
Sarah Plake, KSHB 41 News.